As it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than the old. His ministry is not to repeat the old, but a ministry more excellent than the old. Just as the covenant he mediates is better. It's not the same covenant applied in new garb. It's a new and better covenant, since it is enacted on better promises. Don't you realize that the promises God made to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and Aaron and Zadok and David and Solomon, they were amazing. They were true. They weren't better than what Jesus brought. And Jesus didn't just come to reestablish those old promises, but establish new ones. Chapter 7 of Hebrews, verse 22, he says, this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. This makes so much sense when we remember the very context of the letter of the book of Hebrews. The day and the age and the situation into which this, I think it was originally a sermon by Paul, written down by somebody else into a book. The people that Paul, I think, was preaching to in that day, the situation that had come upon the early church was one of pressure on those early Hebrew Christians. Much of the early church in those days was faithful Jews who had believed in their Messiah, but make no mistake, they were still going to temple, they were attending synagogue, and then they were going to church. One heck of a weekend. They were just Jews that believed in the Jewish Messiah. And then persecution, which is always a divine gift from God. Persecution came from the Romans, like this dividing, cutting edge down onto the church. And as the Jews thrust out Christians, and as the Romans gave religious freedom to Jews but hunted the Christians, these Jewish Christians had to pick a side. Now, the error of their temptation was to think that to pick Jesus was to get rid of the law, the temple, and the priesthood, and the kingdom. They were tempted to wrongly think that here I have Moses, and I'm awaiting the Messiah that would reestablish Moses, and here I have the temple, and I'm waiting the Messiah that would reestablish the temple, and over here I have David and Solomon's line, and I'm waiting for the Messiah that will reestablish the David-Solomonic line, and then over here is Jesus. Wrongly they could think Jesus, who ends David's line, because it's all spiritual now. Jesus, who ends Moses' law, because the law doesn't matter anymore. Jesus, who will throw down the temple because a temple doesn't matter to God anymore. This is the wrong way they could think. People could choose the right side out of blasphemous motivations, or thinking that was their choice. They said, I'll stick true to the age-tested, God-verified truthfulness of the Old Testament. I will go back to temple. And so was this temptation upon the early Hebrew Christians. And then in comes the writer of the Hebrews saying, Jesus is the Messiah who has come to fulfill Moses and be better than Moses, not by reestablishing Moses. He has come to fulfill the temple, not by building another temple. He has come to establish David's line, not by rebuilding a political lineage. Jesus is the law. Jesus is the temple. Jesus is the greater David, the king.